This is Thorin's YouTube channel. Make sure you're tuning in, hitting subscribe.
It's hard to be king, and let's face it, I should know. King of esports, innit? But if I was to tell you the king of energy formulas, it would of course be what? Gamer subs, of course, the one in the little bottom right-hand corner. You can get 10% off your order with the code Thorin, Thorin, at gamersubs.gg. Because the reason it's the king of the energy formulas is it doesn't have all that chemical filler in it. It's very small portion size, so you don't have to carry a massive tub around with you like you're on the fucking gear. Obviously, you got this delicious flavour, actually quite understated, not overpowering and all horrible and chemically that you know has got some BS in it. Actually has a nice like build up, stays at a nice solid level for a while, then gradually tapers off without wrecking you. It's just the best, isn't it? Heavy is the head that wears the crown. But I tell you what, it's not heavy. Having a little bit of gamer subs, it's just delicious, isn't it? Right. When we talk about the original LAN kings, and I bring up names like Potti, contender for best CS player of all time, XeqtR, genius tactician, amazing clutch player, Rambo, one of the best all-around players ever, maybe the best American player in the history of Counter-Strike. People will take it for granted that they were great players, but in a particular way that was very unique, actually, and sets them apart from other great players. Because these guys are as OG as it comes, as OG, original gangster, when it comes to CS competition as you can get. They were competing at the first significant Counter-Strike LANs. We're talking about the end of 2000. We're talking about early 2001 into the late 2001. The first years that there ever were the big tournaments, the big LANs, the CPLs, etc. These guys were going to those LANs, and more than that, they were winning these LANs or going deep in these LANs. Whether for the Americans like Rambo and K-Sharp, that would be the CPLs, Babbage's, Speakeasy, CPL Winter 2001. For the European players, that would be tournaments like CPL Europe, run by Turtle Entertainment, later ESL, CPL London, Amsterdam, Berlin. There's a whole bunch of them back then. Obviously, Cologne was the original one. Now, the first generation of great Counter-Strike players had to be great right out the gate because there were no tournaments. Like, these are the guys that just went to the first tournaments. It's not exaggeration. Like, Potti was winning like the first big tournaments in Europe and America. They were winning the first, and years later they were still the elite players. They just had a special quality about them where they were just good immediately when everyone else had just begun. Now, the reason that's amazing is you don't get any ramp up time. You don't get to make any mistakes. You're just good right out the gate. You've played on LAN when you played most of your career online and you haven't been a serious pro before. They didn't have demos to watch the other teams. You could download the odd POV if someone released it, but there weren't like HLTV. HLTV didn't exist at this point in time. You couldn't just download. The first HLTV event was CPL Winter 2001, and even then it was mega scuffed, and you didn't get a very good sort of POV view from it. It was super basic overlay, so you couldn't just study all their games. You had to sort of read it as you were playing and figure out what they were doing, or watch them while they played the match and you're not playing a match, something like that. And even then, what are you going to get out of it? There wasn't the same overview in that way, and there wasn't time to get acclimatized to all the details of playing with LAN. Like, you're playing in a totally different setting of way lower ping. You've got all this pressure because you're at a world championship, a massive tournament. You're playing against a famous player. You have a different PC setup. It's not your PC for home. It's not bringing your own computer tournament. You might have an audience, a small one, sure, back then, but you might have one. By the way, if you went to the World Cyber Games, you already had an audience, a big audience potentially. You have the spotlight on you. Now people are writing about this match. People are watching it online when HLTV came along. People are waiting for these results. You're going to be judged on it. That's why when those early guys won those CPLs and then became great players and continued for years and years, those guys really are extremely unique in my opinion. Like Potti, for example, who, as I said, eventually I gave it up to Neo and Forrest, but for a long time, even when they were playing, he was the greatest Counter-Strike player of all time for me. And what's insane about that is, if you go back to when he won the Babbage's CPL in late 2000, in an early version of Counter-Strike, he actually won that tournament over all the best North American players and teams, by the way, playing with a fucking Quake player from his organisation, Eyeballers, who'd had to stand in because one of the other players had some sort of fucked up problem with getting a visa or whatever and just couldn't get into the country. So they had to take this guy who was a Quake player and have him play for them in Counter-Strike. And Potti is such a fucking monster player and clutch player on LAN and mega winner. He still won the tournament anyway and just handedly beat the majority of the teams there, essentially with not a real Counter-Strike player, just a guy who'd fucked around on the side and played it. By the way, that player, Litzer, was a very good team deathmatch Counter-Strike player, but it's not the same as being a real Counter-Strike pro. Also, back then, you had less opportunities to fail. Forget the idea you just have to be good out the gate, which you did. If you fail at any of the early tournaments, you will pretty much get immediately cut because there weren't proper contracts, because the other top players are just going for the top spot. They all think they're the best. You will just immediately be cut. Not only if you're bad, but if you just don't win. If you come second or third, they might cut you if they think there's a better deal to be made. So you had to be very good right from the outset. And then also, you had to be very good to even make it to a big LAN. Like, if you're from EU and you want to go to the American CPL, you basically have to be like top 1 or 2 in your country at a minimum, and even then maybe win like a LAN qualifier because your organisation probably doesn't have the money to pay for the airfare and the accommodation. And at the time, you got no salary, by the way. Then how about this? How are you supposed to even know how good your teammates are on LAN? Not only have you not played LANs with them, so you don't know if they're going to choke, but they were amazing online from their bedroom. But even worse, there wasn't even in the early days of CS 1.6 an actual feature where when you died, you could spectate your teammates' POV. That didn't come around till I think CS 1.5, which was like the summer of 2002. Before that, you could spectate a third-person view of your teammate, just like a body moving around, but you could never see the exact angle. You couldn't like look over his shoulder and see the line of sight. So you just saw a guy moving around, shooting people, like, but just like a body, almost like an action movie. So how did you know if he was good? You only knew if he was good by the scoreboard, or if it seemed like, well, you got a good kill there. You could never know if he was aiming right, if he was looking at whack stuff, missing things on his screen. And by the way, as soon as they brought in that feature where you could see the POVs, some people got really exposed. When they went to the first big LANs, some teammates looked over and saw and were like, what the? And some people got exposed and some people did not make it, and some people kind of gotten through early on and were proven to be bullshit, were proven to be frauds. Then how about you're playing best of ones in the majority of these tournaments in the early days? So you have very little margin for error because you already have 2 lives. You can only lose 2 BO1s and you're out of the entire tournament. Then how about the rule set was max rounds 12. So each half is 12 rounds until someone's won 13 within regulation. So now you have a super small margin for error, because back then, in the old Counter-Strike, you didn't have, like, the Galil and the FAMAS weren't even in the early versions of the game, and even then they weren't that strong and used that much until, like, the Poles and Na'Vi in, like, the late 2000s started working with those weapons. Before that, the game was very much about basic pistols and saves, not even that many deagles outside of NA and Russia, and then it was basically, you save, and you do those, the Glock saves even, and then you go up straight to the AK and to the M4, well, the carbine back then, Colt carbine. You didn't do half buys. You didn't do low buys. So as a result, if you lost the pistol round, you're on 2 ecos next, which means if you lose both pistols in an MR12 game, the other team is 6-0 in the game in terms of those rounds and has half of their score that they need, almost. You need to get 13, obviously. Already won from winning 2 big rounds. So now imagine the pressure on you. Imagine how you're going to win, by the way, when you don't win any pistols. You have to just be the best team of all time to do it, and people were able to do this. And then think about the fact that people like Potti and Heaton and these guys would just routinely place top 3, would make the final over and over and over and over and over again. It didn't matter that they had just only 2 lives and you can lose pistols and maybe your teammates aren't good. They had to just find a way no matter what. And then how about the map pool? You know, in the modern day, map pool's essential, like which map we play, what happens with it, what their veto is. Back then, there was no veto. These were BO1 double elim tournaments where the map was determined beforehand by the tournament organizer based on what round of the playoffs you're playing. So round of like 128, 64, keep going 32, 16, quarterfinals, semi-final. Like if you're just in like the round of 16, then the map was already determined. It could be train, for example. What if you're not good on train? What if in your region you don't play train that much? That Europe didn't play as much as any? It doesn't matter. You just win on it. And if they're the best train team, oh well, that's just the way the game worked back then. Again, another reason these guys were absolute legends. So by the way, that means in the final, most of the map's predetermined. Even if the final, so famously for a long time, the final was Nuke, and then later it was Inferno at CPLs. Let's say it was Inferno, right? And both of the teams that make the final aren't good on Inferno. Tough luck. You're just playing the final on it. That's why when those guys, like the Potties and the Heatons, won so many of those CPLs and so many finals and top 3s, they were the gods, guys. They absolutely were like above even other pros. And it seemed like they walked on water. They were unbelievable at cutting teammates, getting the right teammates, playing under pressure, performing no matter what, coming back in games you're down in, closing games out that it's a close game. There's a million losers have a story like, and then I was getting to Potti and he only had 1 health, but somehow he got lucky and killed me. Yeah, just join join the back of the queue, mate. There's about 50 people with that story, and meanwhile, he's got all the trophies. Like, that isn't luck anymore, is it? And then how about how hard the schedule was? People cry now about having to play more than one game a day. If you went to the lower bracket at a CPL, you were playing constantly. You might play 4 or 5 BO1s in a row against different opponents that day. I'd have to go and check, but I think 3 or 4 is how many you could play within a day, because that's how much you had to hustle to get that lower bracket done, because we're doing the whole tournament in 3 or 4 days, and there could be 128 teams in these CPLs in America. Then how about jet lag? Remember that saying people have, that with jet lag, you're supposed to give yourself 1 day per hour that you're trying to adjust by. So if you're trying to adjust from 6 or 7 hours, you need like 6 or 7 days before to gradually build into that. They would fly there and then 1 day or 2 days later just start playing the tournament if they came from Europe. And then when people are in the hotel rooms, the SKs of the world would sometimes be more reasonable. But some of the other teams out there, especially American teams, they would just save as much costs as possible, cut every corner. So there would be, even though it's technically was illegal, 4 or 5 or more people in one hotel room. So there'd be like 2 people in a bed, then there'd be like 1 person in the cot that you can have if someone's staying over. Then there would be 2 or 3 people just on the floor, curled up in a ball, like there was some sort of like crack den or something. It was outrageous, some of the conditions. And then people again weren't having proper sleep, and they were staying up all night partying and playing, and there was drug use and illicit behaviour and people drinking too much. And this is during the tournament, because remember, the tournament's only 3 or 4 days and then everyone goes home. There's no extra days, there's no chill out day, there's no media day, there's none of that. You're just playing and you're just doing all this, and you're having the lifestyle as if you're like Woodstock or something, but at the same time you're playing at a world championship trying to prove how good you are at the game. And also, let's be real, some of these guys are nerds. They might have never done drugs and partied and whatnot before, but they're trying to make that all work with also being at their first big LAN as a Counter-Strike pro. Then, how about this? You can't even say there was the money to motivate you. Spoiler, money's a terrible motivator anyway. Only people without it think it's a good motivator. And spoiler, if it was so good as a motivator, why don't they have any of it? Here's the thing. Money doesn't motivate you in that way. And what's more, you might never get the money even if you win it, even if you promised it in esports at that time. Like, and by the way, because that's a bunch of tournaments like CPL sometimes didn't pay out. And then how about all Click Arena? How about how pitiful it was even if you won? Like, first place at the World Championship would be like $30,000 to share among 5 of you, plus your org, plus your manager. Sometimes you even had to like recover some of the travel costs to your org, because your org had fuck all money. Then your salary, or there wasn't salary in the first couple of years. And even then, when it did come along, it was very small. Like the really good ones, like Team 3D, might be $1,000. Other people might be on €500 a month, €200 a month. Like I say, no salary for top 10 teams at times. Then you had no celebrity outside of esports. You weren't anyone important. And by the way, esports was tiny, because gaming was way smaller. Then competitive gaming was even smaller fraction of that. Well, not many people play online with bad connections. And of competitive gaming, if you expand that to be 100% the whole scene, esports is this tiny bit over here that a few people were following, because you couldn't even always watch it online. There weren't streams, etc., etc., etc. And some people just played the game. There's a lot of people played Counter-Strike. Did many people watch it? Not really. A lot of those numbers were bullshit, quite frankly. So you're also, if you play esports games as a pro, a loser in your home country, including Sweden and places like that. You had all these stupid BS excuses from Americans. Like, oh, over there it's accepted and people like encourage you to play the games. You wouldn't even be able to make a living as the best Swedish player in Sweden. Like, you'd be on almost the poverty line if you know how much money you actually need to live in one of those economies and what the tax is like and all. Oh, it's a nightmare, mate. Then also, by the way, if you're from a country like Germany, oh, don't worry, they were still on the shit in the early 2000s where they were blaming school shootings on fucking esports. So you were actually even potentially some sort of like dangerous, I don't know, dissident or like individual of interest, or all those sinister euphemisms. Like, people might be worried you're a nutter if you play esports. It wasn't considered something cool, believe it or not. You weren't getting the same media attention. So if you hear some of the old names that were the best from the beginning, understand these guys were special. These guys were made of sterner stuff. They didn't get a million chances like the Spawns of the world to overcome their issues, to overcome their problems. They had to just be good from the outset. So like I say, Potti being a contender for best player of all time is because he is just a superhuman. XeqtR, a guy where if you ever watch his POVs, you'd think he's really good, but like he doesn't have the craziest aim. On LAN, just a monster. He'll just win every single clutch. Rambo just never fails. His flaw is so good in his game. He's so smart. He's so well-rounded. He can use every weapon. A player called Dark from Norway. The reason why, by the way, he was on top teams early on is because when people got to LAN, because he'd been a Quake TDM and he was half decent in 1v1, but a Quake TDM pro in Quake 2, This guy was already a monster on LAN, and he would just play to a high level. When online, you'd be like, he's just one of many good players. No, on LAN, he was a different beast, mate. Heaton himself, he had a couple of early LANs which were a bit more dodgy, but then eventually he got rolling and he was just stomping everyone at all these big tournaments. He did that godlike 1v5 against 4 Kings. That was at like what the first real major in Counter-Strike, if you don't know the one on Aztec, the 1v5. Then you got like Element. This guy was like 15 or 16 years old, just like outplaying and outthinking the best players in the world. Hib, famous teammate of Heaton and Potti, just the god AWPer from day one, never missing on LAN in those games. Remember MR12 and you lose the pistol, right? If you lose the pistol and you have to eco twice and you lose those, you're down 0-3. That means on the 4th round on LAN as CT, you can buy an AWP, armor, and almost nothing else except the ammunition for the AWP. Now if you lose the AWP again, you might literally have got like 1 kill in the half so far, and half the half is going to be gone basically. You're going to be in real trouble, and you didn't get the kill with the AWP. So if you want to be an AWP like this guy, you had to absolutely be money, and this guy was money. How about my old mate Moto? Another guy where online, a lot of players as good as him. You took it to LAN though, he was already a more skilled player. He could go head to head with the Europeans and wasn't intimidated. He could AWP, he could rifle, he was a good IGL. These people, they just deserve like an extra category up here where certainly other people came along and refined the game and overcame issues and became incredible players with sometimes a better body of work. But the qualities that made the original LAN Kings the best are so unique and deserve to be cherished, because we'll never see a generation like that again. This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Hades GOUD, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Jensen Goh, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Thooorin, and as always, special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my upcoming content? Maybe you want to ask a question in my monthly AMA. Would you like teasers to find out who the guests are for upcoming interviews and shows? Maybe you want to take part in one of those lengthy esports discussions with me that can go all over the place. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today, where in the description box below, there's a Patreon link.